and I found them unbelievably fascinating and interesting. And I realized how little I knew about my dad. I mean, I had grown up with him, but in terms of a lot of what he was about and again, his whole life was new to me.
You're watching the Spotlight Network, starring Hollywood's newsman,
And if you're just
Logan
joining
Crawford.
investigators, they now believe a single member.
He works with TV and film legends. And now, Logan's shining the spotlight on the world's top emerging authors and creators.
International were abducted.
This is Spotlight with Logan Crawford, streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV.
I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're taking a heartfelt journey through family, fatherhood, and life's biggest questions with an amazing author. His name is John Glaser, and he has penned a wonderful book, 101 Questions from My Daughters. In the book, he answers the thoughtful and sometimes challenging questions his daughters have asked him, sharing wisdom, life experiences, failures, triumphs, and love. It is a deeply personal memoir that not only bridges generations, but also inspires every reader to open up and share their own stories. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today. We thank the team for helping us put him on TV today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. John, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Logan, it's a pleasure. I appreciate it, the time we have together.
I appreciate your time as well, sir. Let's start out by talking about your daughters. How
Yeah.
many do you have? And tell us a little bit about your family life.
Well, I have three daughters, Julia, Jessica, and Teresa. They range in age from 41 to 36, so they're all growing up.
Wow.
There are parents. Each of them has two kids each. The two of the older two graduated from kindergarten last week, and so they're running in ages from 1.5 to 6 years old. But those are the three, and they're treasures. They've done really well in their lives, and I'm happy for them. They're in a good place.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the questions that they ask you. Are they questions they asked from the time they were little to now? Tell us a little bit about the types of
Yeah.
questions you included in your book.
Well, Logan, for the last 2 years, every week they'd email me a question. And these questions can be, who inspires you? Were you rebellious as a teenager? In fact, I was. I was kicked out of high school. Who do you admire most in your professional career? When were you what's the hardest thing you've ever done? So they send these questions and I write a response. And the response can be half a page, the response probably never longer than 2 pages. And so that's what we've done back and forth. The book contains the first 101 questions, as you gathered to that, and the first 101 responses. We've continued. I'm actually up to question 140 this week. And so we continue to do that. And Logan, about a dozen years ago, I was the MC at a memorial service for my father. And in the room were about 80 of his contemporaries who would get up and tell a story about my dad and, or a memory of him or why they admired him, why he was a mentor to them, etc. And I found them unbelievably fascinating and interesting. And I realized how little I knew about my dad. I mean, I had grown up with him, but in terms of a lot of what he was about and again, his whole life was new to me. And I remember telling the room, said, I'm really grateful for these stories. I really am. I mean, it's just to get to hear about my father, to know him, etc. But I wish I'd heard them from him rather than from you all. And I'm going to give you all an assignment, this room of 80 contemporaries. You're going to go home and tell your kids your stories so they hear it from you. So what I thought, Logan, is this is a book by which I can share with my kids. This is me. For better or for worse, all the things I've gone through, so that you know your father, and while he's still here, to have these stories that he can tell you and share with you.
That's great. I mean, I had a similar experience when my father died, people telling stories about him. And I knew him on another level that I'd never known him before. He was just dad. I never really got into a conversation of what did you dream of being when you were younger and that kind of stuff. And it was just wonderful to hear from people. But like you said, I would have rather have heard from him himself. So this was a great opportunity for you and for others now to
Yeah.
explore these types of questions.
Yeah, I'm sure Logan, like you and like me, and I hope with my daughter, there's a depth to your father that you didn't appreciate growing up. And frankly, when you were growing up, you were forming. So you never really had the opportunity, or often not the opportunity, to really talk as an adult, from one adult to another about life and love and things that go well and things that don't go so well, etc.
Exactly. He's just dad. You don't realize he's a man of dreams, a man of love,
Sure.
a man of fears, all of that stuff. Talk to us about some of the questions that you were asked. Is there one that might come to mind that you'd share with the audience right now?
Well, they're all over the map. So some of them, for example, have you ever had a supernatural experience? And the answer is
Yes.
yes. Um, you know, or what does love mean to you? So I've been with my wife for 50 years. So what does love mean between the two of us? If you go through your career, who was the person you admired the most and why? The question this week that came through, it's not in the book, is if you had to thank someone, who would you thank and what would you thank them for? If you go back all of your time, pick one person to thank, etc. So those are some of the questions. And the questions can be, what did you wish you had known before you became a parent? Or if the house were on fire, what would one thing you would take with you? So they're surprising at times because, who would have thought to ask about a supernatural experience? Or who would have thought to ask about your favorite cartoon show growing up? And sometimes it's surprising because you say, I've gone through a lot of life and I've never really thought about what's the hardest thing I have ever done. Or when was the time in my life I was the most scared and why? So they can be surprising because you think, how did I get this far without having really spent any time thinking about this? And when you think about it, you can be surprised by your answer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you tell us about the supernatural experience that you had?
Sure. Well, I was at the end of my freshman year of college. I decided I was going to walk up the North Fork of the Gila River in Arizona alone. I spent I was on trail crew in the Pacific Northwest as a teenager, so a lot of time outdoors. And about 3 days into this, I hadn't seen a single human being. And it's up this river, and there was a old Pueblo Indian dwelling up on the side of the cliff, and it looked like it was going to rain, so I clambered up there to spend the night in this dwelling. Two rooms of the dwelling. One had a nest of bats, and I was going to sleep in the other. And while in that room, remember looking across the river, so the river is kind of small. There's a guy walking up. Said, "Son of a gun, there's a human being. I haven't seen a human being." And I waved him and he waved back and he came up and we talked. He had been out in the desert for a month. And I was the first person he had seen in a month. So we talked for a while and it got dark and he had to leave. And I remember Logan, he walked away with this big walking stick he had. It was really unusual because it had a knob on the head, which was a worm-eaten knob of a tree. And I remember him walking down the rocks away, carrying the stick. That night, I had this dream, very vivid dream, that he was trying to kill me at night. And I woke up and there was that stick laying against the side of the dwelling. And I was sure he had left with that thing. It took me 3 days to get there. It took me one day to get out as a result of that thing. But that's probably the closest to being kind of spooky at
Yeah.
11.
That is an amazing story, no doubt. Also, an amazing story is an adventure you had hitchhiking from
Yes.
Fairbanks to the Panama Canal. Tell us about that, why you did it, and what the experience was like thumbing down the road.
Well, Logan, it's one of these things too, where you get asked a question and it causes you to think. So I finished college with a degree in math. And from Duke, great school, et cetera. Now, all of my contemporaries, colleagues, seem to be so certain about what to do with their life. They're going to law school or business school or get a job, et cetera. Beats me. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just was glad to be done. So I took my first job was at a Pizza Hut, making pizzas. And second job, I got a job up in a salmon cannery in Alaska. And it was great. It was a great job. We worked really hard, but at the end, early August, the salmon have stopped running. So there I was in Fairbanks, Alaska, with $6,000 in cash. I had nothing to do. And so I thought, I'm going to hitchhike. So I hitchhiked from Fairbanks, came down to Seattle, crossed over to North Carolina. So hitchhiked to North Carolina because I was madly in love with this woman who was still in school. I'm still in love with her today. We've been married, and then we spent 2 weeks with her, hitchhiked to Los Angeles, and then down Central America, and I got to Panama. It took me 6 months to go
Wow.
out and do this. And I remember Logan getting to Panama, and I thought, two things. One, I'm tired of hitchhiking. It's fun, but it's getting old. We're like really old.
Yeah.
And the second is, what am I doing? I'm a little slow on the uptake. You may be faster on the uptake in the amorous side of your life than I was, but I'm in love with this woman. What the hell am I doing? Out on the
Right.
road when she's back in North Carolina. So I said, I'm going back to North Carolina. I'm going to be with her. I don't know what I'm going to do, but at least I'm going to be with her. So that was the life experience, was the hitchhiking. And it was a remarkably formative experience because Logan, first, there were a couple of scary times, but that by and large wasn't the case. But you met some people who were just, regular folks who were really neat. So, for example, I hitchhiked from Seattle to Spokane, Washington. It's about 400 miles. And I got a ride from two women. I thought they were old. They're probably 40s, which is young now. And their husbands were truck drivers who drove back and forth between Seattle and Spokane every night. They just trucked back and forth. And these two ladies would get on the road and on the CB radio just chatted up with all the truck drivers. It was fun. They had a great time just talking to their husbands and to the husbands' buddies, driving back and forth. And those were just people you would never have met otherwise. Met because they managed to, for whatever set of reasons, pick me up with a piece of cardboard said points east.
Very cool. Very cool. How did you make your way back to North Carolina? Did you hitch that way as well?
No, I flew into Miami from Panama and then
Okay.
hitchhiked from Miami up to North Carolina.
Wow. Wow. You were an avid hitchhiker, but that was the era people were doing it. I did it a little bit when
Did
I
you
was
really?
young. Yeah, but I stopped when I got one bad experience. I got into a car that was like a smoke shop of marijuana.
Yeah,
And the guy drove like he was crazy. And I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm not hitchhiking anymore. It was all short distance to and from
yeah,
school and that kind of stuff. But it was fun. It was an
yeah.
adventure. And most of the people who picked you up, like you said, were cool, nice people who had great stories to share. Interesting, you were a math major at Duke, yet you
Hmm.
got expelled from high school, which going back to when you and I were in school was quite a shameful experience. Tell us about getting expelled from school and what happened there.
Well, Logan, and I don't know, I went to an all-male Catholic high school taught by
Me too.
Jesuits.
Me
Oh,
too.
did you really, son of a gun? Yeah, and they're remarkable. I love the Jesuits. Absolutely love the Jesuits. But
Yep.
three buddies and I wrote an underground newspaper. And it was named after the school, and we each had a column, and we all wrote about either drinking beer or going out with young ladies. And we knew a lot about drinking beer. We had no working knowledge at all about young ladies, but we had hopes and aspirations, etc. And Logan, we made the mistake of publishing it on the afternoon of Parents' Night. So mom and dad came down to meet with the priests, and this stuff was all over the place, and it's kind of raunchy. I mean, it's well written, but it's kind of raunchy. And the roof blew off. And the following morning, we were in front of a tribunal of the Jesuits, one by each. And I was the last kid through. And you probably remember from your Catholic upbringing, mea culpa, Latin for father, I'm so sorry, etc. My three buddies said, I'm sorry. I got in there and I was mad because here they were teaching you to challenge, challenge the political orthodoxy, challenge the church, think for yourself. And I said, I'll show you what challenge looks like. So, Father, the principal said, Mr. Glasser, are you aware of the damage done to the school and how this is counter to everything we've tried to teach you as a fine, upstanding Catholic young man? And I said, I'm not sorry at all. As far as I'm concerned, the Catholic Church is a criminal organization. And I said, for thousands of years, you've suppressed science, conducted unjust wars, and I frankly think the position on birth control is killing millions of women and children. And I was actually proud of what I had done because I hoped it would be the first in a long series of criminal activity on my part in keeping with the tradition of the Catholic Church. I went too far because I was mad at it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, they said, listen, Buster, that's it. You are out of here as a result of that. So I still have a copy of it, Logan. It's actually a pretty well written
Wow.
piece of work.
That's amazing. It's amazing. It was much easier to get kicked out of Catholic school than public school, obviously. Like I said, it was we were always so afraid we would get kicked out for our hijinks and stuff like that. The priests I went to school with would have given you a smack in the face in addition to
Yeah.
the talking that you got. But you were a brave young man to speak back to a priest like that in that era, no doubt. But you said it articulately, said it eloquently, and you made a strong case, which they probably didn't like. Um,
That's for sure.
which is amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. So this has been really a great gift, this idea. You've taken the passing of your father, you turned it into a exercise basically with your daughters and a way to communicate with them and share your life, share your lessons, share your insight. So It's very, very cool because it's multi-generational as
Yeah.
well. That's what I love about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Logan, a lot of the things, for example, if you were to say, what is the most important thing your mother ever taught you? I mean, I don't care what generation you are, that's a thing to think about. What is
Mm.
it your mom taught you, for better or for worse, what she taught you? And if you were to type to think about, if you were to, for example, here's a question, Logan. If you had like 30 seconds left in your life and you wanted to look back on your life, what would you want to say about your time on this planet? So I'd like to be able to say the fall, and you think, I'm not asking for the answer, but nonetheless, that is the kind of thing that is, I don't care whether you're 85 or 45 or 15. Now, 15 is a little young to be able to answer that question well. But those are the types of questions that are cross generations. And it also, when you listen to someone tell you what they would want to say, it tells you a lot about them and what they believe and what they value and whether they've made mistakes they wish they hadn't made, or what they're proud of, the things they've done, which they say, this is really my great contribution to myself, to my family, perhaps to my industry, and perhaps to the world as a whole.
Absolutely. You're a thoughtful man. You've got thoughtful daughters. They've asked provocative questions, and you've given some very compelling answers. And they are questions that we should all grapple with, think about, and share with our children.
Yeah.
The name of the book is 101 Questions for My Daughters. In the book, John answers the thoughtful and sometimes challenging questions his daughters have asked him, sharing wisdom, life experiences, failures, triumphs, and love. It's an amazing book. It's a book that you'll want to share, that you'll want to experience, that you'll want to think back upon and reflect upon. John, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Logan, it's a pleasure, and I wish you and your listeners the best.
I appreciate your time, your wit, your wisdom, and your insight and your candor here today. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time until next time on Spotlight.